So, as we bring home this fantastic day of empowerment, I just want to share that there is no more appropriate and vibrant force of empowering others than my dear friend, Sumreen Ahmad. So excited to introduce Sumreen. She is the Global Change Management Lead for Accenture. She's got over 20 years of experience in leadership development, human capital and organizational design, journey and change management, and strategic planning. She spearheads the efforts to develop professional standards for change management across the world, and she's recognized as an expert at building inclusive and equal and innovative cultures, and has spoken at a variety of industry conferences. In addition to her work at Accenture, which is big, huge stuff, Samrina also serves as the strategic planning lead and board member for Zaman International. It's a Southeast Michigan-based nonprofit humanitarian organization that provides wraparound services to women and children in extreme poverty. They were recognized for the impact the impact that they delivered, and they were also recognized as this year's CNN Top 10 Heroes. Sumreen, thank you so much for sharing your time and talent today. I can't wait to hear what you have to tell us.
Thank you, Stephanie. And, I feel so privileged to be the closing speaker, and especially a high bar. I felt like Lee was the perfect segue into this topic, but we also could have just ended there. And I think we all would have felt very inspired moving on. But Stephanie, as you know, this topic that I'm about to talk about is just so near and dear to my heart, not just because of my own personal journey, but just how my own professional experiences have just shown me the realm of just what's possible when we do dare to imagine and we make that moral commitment to really building and lifting and empowering with that pursuit of a better world for all. So I'll just a little background from my earliest recollections and really reinforced by my parents' lived example. I came to understand that connectedness to something greater than myself was going to be the path through which I was going to achieve my potential. I was raised by these hardworking immigrant parents who left everything behind to move to Canada to have a better life for their yet to be born children. And I had that early exposure to a life of service, civic engagement, community. They were anchored in faith and family just at the forefront. Their goal for us was not to just achieve for our own self-actualization, but really what we would go on to do for others. And oddly enough, I think for me, this particular topic, it was something that was shown to me before I actually really understood what it meant in real terms. So when I think about those early lessons, what might as well have been a poster hanging behind our kitchen table at home, here are some of the guiding principles that we were raised with. It's this idea that humility is really a strength and it's not a weakness. Empathy is the basis for building all connection. Gratitude and patience, even and especially when you have little, is just something that you need. It's core to perspective. Having that heightened consciousness that's anchored in emotional intelligence and self-awareness, it's necessary just to be able to meet people where they're at. And having that personal accountability, right? And really, I'm glad Lee talked about tempering your ego. It is just fundamental. Before you can govern others, you need to govern yourself. And it was just fundamental in how we were raised. A big one for me in our obligation to each other, honoring dignity as a human right. It was obviously part of it, but it really serves as the most powerful impetus to connect with one another. And then finally, leadership. I'm in the company of leaders here. For me, it was really not about power or authority or titles. I mean, rather, when you're called to serve, it comes with that burden of responsibility that really cannot be taken lightly. And I think I really started to understand that we're just one human family, and that these formative early teachings gave me that deep, deep appreciation that when you're given the right surroundings, that untapped potential that we talk about that exists within each of us can just make all of the difference in the world that we need to positively change. So when I think about that one defining moment, and hopefully people have their own, that really just has remained constant in terms of that compass for me, and I think about my journey, it was actually 22 years ago when I accepted my offer to start my career in the corporate sector. And my father, no surprise, he understood my ambition, and he kind of sent me into the world and told me, honey, no matter what paycheck you get or title you get, if you're not serving humanity, then you really will not be serving your purpose. And that really hit home. So for me, the foundation had been laid, and in their mind, I had a responsibility to go pay it forward. So let's fast forward to today, current day. Beyond the tragic loss of life, of course, COVID-19 is just impacting every single person in this country, around the world, in so many ways. It's scary, and we're feeling vulnerable. And as we continue to deal with the unknowns of the virus, the shutdowns, the politics of masks, the risk to those who are essential and being sent out to work on the front lines, countered with those who are being laid off and have no clear path ahead, we're all faced with some level of threat to our well-being and just that desperation for normalcy. And so in step, of course, we've got the social justice movement that is rightly underway across the country. We're being challenged to examine our own biases and really our contributions. And I think that, while giving school supplies to low-income children or going and building houses in a downtrodden neighborhood is really certainly noble, it's just clear now that these efforts can no longer really be absent of that conscious acknowledgement and need to address those underlying socioeconomic issues that have kept these children, their parents, their grandparents in generational poverty. I also, from my own, lens, I see rising rates. We know this, rising rates of loneliness, and we understand that now more than ever there is a crisis of belonging. And given the amount of time that we spend working, the workspaces work, a meaningful place for creating connection. But now, especially, we're feeling the impacts of isolation and demands. And I can speak for myself, that feeling of overwhelming, unmanageable amount that's been put on us has brought us just actually to the brink of what we will see to be the largest mental health crisis. And it's an important point. And so, um, you know, this past decade, I think we've seen really an increased focus on building organizational cultures. I think we've matured. We understand that inclusion and equality and accessibility are key. And so what's great about that is, we're recognizing a diverse workforce, we're implementing actionable initiatives and programs across the board that we're seeing that don't just support equity, but they're really pushing for that representation of different ideas and voices and experiences. And we're seeing a lot of this. And, I think it's great. I'm overwhelmed. I think it's fantastic to see this tidal wave of commitment that we've seen across the spectrum. You think about the rapid response to anti-racism in the days that followed, the murder of George Floyd. I've seen mental wellness programs rolled out across just to be able to focus on an employee's well-being, and corporate social responsibility efforts that have more of that heightened focus around the moral and ethical obligations of a company. But for me, I would argue that, equality is a great milestone, but the aspirational objective here really is this topic that we're talking about today. It's about building that connection to fulfill one's deeper need to be heard, valued, and feel that belonging. And at the heart of this belonging is this belief, I think, that we're connected by something greater, right? That this understanding that what we find sacred, what shapes our values, what shapes our beliefs is going to be something that's honored and heard and seen by others. For me, this is the kind of empowerment that I strive for the people that are around me, the impact that we wish to achieve through the programs and initiatives for our employees, our volunteers, our clients, for those that just surround us. And I'm always left with that question. And I think what I've struggled with always is, how do we recognize this empowerment? How does one make it real? How do we measure it? How do we drive the impact in the most meaningful ways? And how do we scale it? For me, I've done a lot of work in kind of the corporate sector and doing it with my own peers, et cetera. But the fundamental question for me has always been, what is this empowerment if it's just for that select few in society? And that's what drives me. And so for me, it was this intersection for me, in terms of my personal and professional, where we started to see the gray line. It was actually during a very grueling and intense period in my career, whereby I think we can all probably relate to those experiences that are character building. I guess we'll leave it at that. No shortage of moments where you just want to walk away and leave it all. And for me, that was really when I started to pursue trying to answer those questions for myself. I actually had just newly been promoted, and I had leadership that was saying all the right things. We'd never met someone with so much patience and tenacity and perseverance. And I think it would have been just easy to just stay the course and be politically correct and, move on up in the organization and really strive for that as being my objective. But for me, it actually had somewhat of a bit of an opposite effect. I think that's when I had this burning need to dig deep and to then start committing to translating all those skills that I had back into communities who probably didn't have the same access and exposure to the opportunities that I'd been privileged to have. And so with a dozen years of pretty solid experience under my belt, I was working with Fortune 100 executives. I actually had some really great skills, strategic planning, organizational maturity, these large scale global implementations, and understanding what it meant to deliver and measure impact. So for me, at that point, the question was really, where did I want to channel my time and energy? And that had a sense of urgency attached to it. So I think, as is the case when you put some sincere intentions out there in the world, I actually landed myself in the lap of an incredible visionary who went actually on to be my strongest mentor. But I also came to, through her, a humanitarian organization that was just the early phases of its formation. I took on the challenge to put my strengths, to put my money where my mouth was, to put my work to embrace this mantra of give back to the world more than you take from it. And I signed on at that time to be the strategic lead, as you mentioned in my intro, for Zaman International. And this is an organization that is built on the premise of empowerment. It is really about facilitating change and advancing the lives of marginalized women, so people who live below the poverty line. Selfishly, I found this exhilaration, right, in being able to take all of these great skills that I had and put them back into a place where the value and the impact was just so immense. The smallest things actually translated into so much value. And year on year, I took advantage of learning and sharing everything that I had learned through the corporate channels and being able to just really translate that. And I will tell you, the personal validation and that growth that comes with that, it's actually pretty hard to describe. But being someone who knows how to measure and communicate value, here is just some of the metrics that demonstrate, right, for Zaman, what we've been able to do since its inception. And, same motivation that I started with, but that idea of unleashing potential in others, but now I was able to do it at scale and really do it in a way that had that widespread impact. What's really interesting about the timing of this is that during that same time, while I'm working for Accenture, it too has grown to an organization of 500,000 people globally, and ranked the most inclusive company in the world. And it really is backed by this commitment, right? It's committed to investing in building a culture that is based on empowerment, while that's benefiting actually from the innovation that comes with that. And I'll touch on that just shortly. So the privilege for me really of being part of two best-in-class organizations, and more so the intersection of being able to learn, give, and lead at both, has just been this incredible privilege, but also has given me some insight in terms of what it means to really pursue a better world for all. And it's the premise, I guess, of why I'm here, and should probably get to the point in terms of what lessons that I want to share with the group here today. So in a spirit of trying to make this a little bit tangible, here's some just learnings from the field. The first one is really early understanding it's a mindset. It's about knowing that we are the system. When you think about empowerment based on the notion of power, but you also understand that power can change, and more importantly, power can expand. It changes the way you think about your role and the way you can contribute. I believe that solving humanity's toughest problems, it doesn't require a single hero, but it does require a system of people and companies, for-profit, nonprofit, public organizations that actually can rally around a common purpose. So we are the system. We decide how we define success. We are the ones who can choose the kind of economy and the society that we want to live in. We can continue to play by the tired rules that work for only a few at the expense of many, or we can imagine and build new rules that work for everyone. So you have to accept this premise that it is within our individual and collective grasp. And I will tell you, even on the days that the news headlines make you feel otherwise, embracing this mindset is pretty fundamental. I recognize that it might sound utopian or naive to think that one person's actions can make a difference, or to deny the systemic and systematic oppression that is deeply rooted. My work in the nonprofit sector actually has shown me countless examples of individuals who committed to just embrace the difficult. Interestingly, right before COVID-19 lockdown, I had this privilege of being able to spend a week out in California with all of this year's CNN heroes. And just believe me all when I tell you that these were everyday, normal human beings with had some that had less resources than I had, who had just committed to translating their passions and their skills to solve real big problems, climate change, domestic violence, trauma. And they were able to make a huge impact. And I don't think that the world needs another hero, but I do think we need millions of heroic acts. And when you do it right, we can be a positive force for change. So the second lesson is really that the work has to start from within. To create this kind of change, we've got to commit to the heart work. I say that heart work is the hard work. To dig deep within ourselves, that's a prerequisite to solving complex issues. When you can find and maintain that balance between the individual and the community, freedom and belonging, competition and collaboration, that's a refinement of your own lens and character. And on the daily, with every interaction, it is so imperative that you think about how your own individual actions and behaviors and values and conduct really reflect in fostering that empowerment for other people. When you think about just unfortunately how polarized our world has become, this will require to have the difficult conversations. You're going to hold opposing views in tension, and it's going to challenge your ability to hold true to your own beliefs, but at the same time create space for others to be able to do the same. You may find yourself uncomfortable, and I always think that's actually okay. That's when all that growth is happening. That is the moment where you're growing. But it's really only then that you can build up this trust currency, right? You can seek to understand, and who knows, you may even be one of those that walks alongside to accompany someone and commit to their own success. For me, I believe that it's only by really ensuring that every human's dignity is at the center of every interaction, by seeking to understand that we will have differences, but holding on to this belief that we're bound together by one humanity. We may not agree on every detail, but we are, united, and every human being is worthy of the compassion and the dignity and the respect. I think that without this level of commitment, we're just simply not going to adequately address the root causes. There's so many efforts right now, but that's the root cause of what we've got to get to in terms of really trying to get to the societal, systemic issues that we're confronted with right now. Moving on to number 3. So I think a new breed of leadership is really, really emerging, and it's forums like this that I got a lot of juice out of. As business leaders, we are held to this privileged position to support and influence, and most importantly, empower individuals and communities in which we serve. The role for me of this virtuous leader that has just an increased demand for compassion and courage and vulnerability, I think is just needed now more than ever. And no, I'm not gonna go all Brene Brown on you, although I do highly recommend her work. I think what I'm seeing emerge in terms of this next generation of leadership is just giving me so much hope. As a leader who has a sphere of influence, the world is going to offer you 1,000 opportunities for deeper success for the people that you lead. The question really is, what do you do with that power and that privilege? In the most basic sense, human beings, myself, yourself included, we thrive when we know that someone believes in us. And so you're going to encounter those moments that you may teach the person in front of you as if they could change the world, right? To listen with that reverence of that expands opportunities for others, or to just help somebody who possibly can't even help themselves. So, here's what I've seen in the intersection of my work in the corporate and nonprofit world. When you choose to ignore the voices of those that the world excludes, we lose the possibility of solving for some of the problems that matter most to most of us. We really do. But if you actually take a step back and you're successful at listening to those voices with all of your attention, without judgment, with empathy, we actually have the opportunity to not just elevate yourself, because that's a stretch for yourself, but also those around us. And so I think about the stories you tell yourself, the stories that really matter. They have consequences. And I think the stories that you choose to tell yourself and the ones that you tell others, that's ultimately what we define and what we celebrate and what we become and how we influence the people around us. So the challenge I think that I leave you and myself always is, how are you as a leader elevating the members of your team to listen to those voices that are unheard, extracting that collective intelligence that exists, often overlooked, and creating those necessary connections to be able to really solve for the greater good. Lesson number 4. So, as I spend a lot of my life, my day job, really leading and executing this global culture change. So I've had the firsthand privilege to work for a company that I do believe understands that if Accenture is going to go out there and change the way in which the world works and lives, we have to look inward, right? We have to change the way our employees work and live. That's integrity as a value. And so when you look at the leading organizational cultures that drive innovation, they actually do prioritize this quest for empowerment at the core of all of their efforts. It's a science, it's a methodology. It's built on 3 pillars. The first being bold leadership for people to do the right thing. The second is really comprehensive actions that have the ability to influence the policies and the protocols around you. And then the third is just, again, it's the culture piece. It's creating those empowering environments that really are built on understanding that mutual trust and respect, and it's inclusive of those diverse perspectives and voices and experiences and needs of our people. The challenge, though, I think it's always the struggle on the corporate side is, how do you quantify this? What is it worth the investment? How does that culture still honor and respect individual and the uniqueness of all of its people, while still achieving, in some cases, shareholder or investor expectation? And that's a very fine thing to calibrate. Interestingly enough, it has been proven when you do quantify the impact to the bottom line, it has proven to actually have very strong returns. And it's great we're delving deeper into this space. Cultures that are focused on empowerment translate into stronger employee willingness to innovate, to the ability to innovate. So we call this the innovation mindset. And actually, it is 11 times higher in companies where those 3 pillars are actually prevalent. And I think about the post-digital world, especially now with COVID-19 and everything being digital. Innovation is actually synonymous with survival. And so we cannot underestimate what the value of this innovation mindset is. And then finally, collaboration, right? Collaboration is key to moving forward. As we will hopefully sooner rather than later move out of this COVID pandemic. We are in a new normal, but I think the diversified and very complex nature of the global challenges that we're facing, everything from eliminating poverty and homelessness and providing access to healthcare and repairing the fraying infrastructure and combating climate change and education reform, and I could go on and on. It's going to require a very strong partnership between public, private, nonprofit sectors. And that's just not an option. It's essential, fundamental. Those who do see the role of business as solely to make profits, they're coming at this from a lens of either or. And to be able to move forward, and when you think about the interdependence that we have, we're only going to flourish if we actually reset and think about a both and thinking. And what that means is integrating purpose and profit, generosity and accountability, community and the individual. So it's an and thinking. And I think the untapped opportunities that exist at this intersection of profit and for-profit, nonprofit, makes it possible to just really change the assumptions that we might have about the way things are, but looking ahead the way they should be. Nonprofits, I will say, have to let go of the suspicion that corporations are greedy or exploitative or unconcerned with complex issues facing humanity, but they do still need to hold to account those that are greedy and exploitative. Similarly, for-profit organizations have to challenge their own assumptions that all nonprofits aren't these utopian, seeking, morally righteous do-gooders that get nothing done. But they still do need to take to task those who are in fact ineffectual. So my own experience has taught me that, when you have that right vision and you have the right framework in place, there actually is a place that you can meet in the middle. The work I do in the nonprofit sector on a personal level feeds me in a way that my job in the corporate sector may never. And And I'm actually okay with that. I appreciate the ability to move between both. In the nonprofit side, I see and thrive through the resilience, the passion, the compassion, this deep focus on the dignity of the human, the out of the box thinking. And sometimes, the a willingness to not get caught up in sometimes some of the performative or the transactional altruism that we may see from the for-profit world. On the flip side, if you think about the reach and the resources and the structure and the access that the for-profit sector has, there's a lot of potential to be had. So a real example, just by way of recent, as Stephanie alluded, when Zaman was noted a winner as the CNN recognition, there was actually a large automotive company that reached out and approached Zaman International with the offer to provide free cars for the Zaman clients, these women. And the natural answer might have just been to say yes, because who wants to turn down free cars? But that wasn't what the direction was. Rather, in that strategic long-term focus, the intent at that point really was going back to this automotive and saying, why can't we leverage your influence to actually address the root cause of car insurance in Detroit? And that was the real deterrent, right? So it wasn't about just taking the short term, it was actually thinking through the long term. I will say that honing this skill of looking for those creative solutions where both sides can be effective requires a shift in assumptions and behaviors. And so partnering effectively takes that commitment. So I think, my journey, and I'll just quickly close here, has taught me that empowerment would not reveal itself by me just saying stay, at the starting block. You just don't plan your way into it. And mine is just one story. I just want to close with the hope for where we can take this. From where I sit, I look out and I see all of the names that, participate and what the Detroit Economic Club, youth leadership group is doing, is I see a new generation rising, one that's more conscious, a generation that's more willing to confront the ugly truth and openly recognize that, some acts by some to denigrate or hurt others just are unacceptable. I see some systems of privileges that are eroding right in front of our eyes. And this realization that in order for, us to be empowered, we must all be empowered. So I think that we're pushing past, we're recognizing that this is a transformational change. And that we've got to move past this idea that this is someone else's problem or it's going to be solved by hashtag activism. And it's about elevating that dialogue about what the change is possible. And so just thinking about reconstituting business practices, developing our leaders based on kind of this moral compass, courage and compassion, just injecting it back into the system, fighting that urge to polarize that happens in every moment, it seems, and just really developing a breed of responsible leadership. So I think at this pinnacle moment, I'm convinced that our commitment has to extend beyond the business community as we collectively raise the bar. In moving this needle forward, it's just understanding that when it's done right, this lens of empowerment in the pursuit of goodness for all serves as a force that's greater good for organizations and the communities and for humanity as a whole. And I think in doing so, it takes me back. It takes me back to my father's words that it's only then that we can actually serve our true purpose and untap our full potential. So with that, Stephanie, I'm going to give it back to you and thank you again for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sumreen. Jason, I know you're closing us out. That was fantastic, by the way.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sumreen. And I think you summed up everything beautifully. We are clearly in a time of change, in a time of re-looking at the way we do things. And I felt like you did an amazing job giving us insights and sharing your story to help us look at ways that we can do that.